a friend from Toronto, Canada, and I thought doing something different to my normal wine blogs and chatting to some winemakers in this time of lockdown and everyone sitting at home, talk a bit of rugby. I think everyone's missing sport on TV. So Carl and I met in 2003 when a friend of mine and myself, Matt Zondag, played a season of rugby at the Balmy Beach Club. It sounds like some Miami nightclub, but it's actually one of the top rugby clubs in the Ontario Rugby League. And in Canada, yeah, true. I guess, Carl, one of my first recollections was I arrived mid-March that year, 2003, and it was freezing cold still. I think it was -2 or something on my first training day there at the fields, and Bruce, the coach, just said, look, we're playing a game on Saturday. And I remember it was this remote place. It looked like some farmland that was, leveled up. And here rocks up Carl Nichols, a 25-test veteran, playing beside me. But more importantly, I think what we are used to in South Africa, and you've been here and played a test as well. We're so spoiled with facilities from school level, straight up. Great fields, great locker rooms. But I get, it's a big part of our culture, and rugby is, such a big sport here. Before we get into how you grew up, I guess your professional career, what made you play rugby, or how were you introduced to rugby? Being a young schoolboy in such a mad ice hockey nation, what was your first introduction to rugby union?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say, I imagine our rugby pitches in Canada are of the same quality as your hockey rinks in South Africa.
Possibly.
Yeah. My parents hail from Scotland, and so I was brought up playing soccer. My dad tried to put us in hockey. I have a twin brother, and he put us both into hockey at a young age, around 5-6 years old, and we lasted about 2 weeks. Didn't like the equipment, loved the essence of the game, but just couldn't handle the equipment. Skating was so foreign to me, and to be honest, still is. I can't skate. And I just gravitated more towards soccer. But as I developed and played rep soccer, I really developed some really good skills. And then was introduced. I went to boarding school about an hour and a half outside of Toronto, and was introduced to the game by my roommate, who said, "What are you going to do in the fall for a sport?" And I thought, well, I'm at a boarding school. I'm going to try rowing, because they had a really good rowing program. And he looked at me and said, "No, man, chicks dig rugby players." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's one of the best games in the world." And he put a rugby ball in my hand, and we spent hours through the winter spinning a rugby ball down the hallway. Yeah. And I had two Welsh coaches and one coach from Newcastle, and they loved the essence of the game. I mean, we spent hours talking about individual players, and this was back when when every player had a job, and the lawyers, the doctors, who were all gathering in March to watch and to play in the Five Nations at the time. So it was a really cool essence of the game that I gravitated towards. And then with my transition from soccer, the skills came over, and away we went.
Yeah, I remember, unfortunately, we don't get a lot of North American sports on our TV here. So, you follow a little bit of NHL or football or baseball, but it's not really something we grew up with knowing at all. But I do remember that first drive from the airport when Norm picked me up, those blue maple leaf flags from everyone's car, because I think they were just went into playoff season. And then I was really lucky to go and watch a game. But I think if you're a rugby player, ice hockey would probably be your, I enjoy the pace of it, the accuracy of the players, much more than the physicality that maybe the football guys have, American football. But I'm a big fan of ice hockey. And we have a couple of rigs here in South Africa, but I have no idea how to skate. So I'll leave that to the guys who can.
Exactly.
So you made your debut in '96 versus Uruguay. I hate the cliche of asking, do you remember the game? Because I think all of us, it's such a significant game in your career, you always remember. But I think you started at wing as well, being a centre by trade.
Yeah, yeah. I was put on the wing because I was playing on the wing for my provincial team. Completely kind of out of position, but like any good back player, you can slot in anywhere.
Yeah.
And was selected on the wing because of a few things that happened in the provincial game where we won the national championships that put me on the radar. And so they slotted me in on the wing, but thankfully there was an injury in the second half to one of our centers, and I slid back into my outside center, inside center position. I forget which one it was, but yeah.
And you were 21 at that stage, so for especially for a Canadian player, that's pretty young to join such a, well, I guess in international rugby, 21 is a young age to make that step up.
Yeah. I was, when I went to boarding school, I played for 1 year and then started on the provincial track, and was really frustrated very early on because I thought I should be playing on the first team when I was 17 years old. And that caused a bit of frustration, but it also was a great driver to get myself noticed and to keep working harder and harder and harder to get fitter and stronger as peers who would be 5 years older than me. So that was a fortunate turn of trade for me that I got the opportunity, obviously playing the Balmy Beach Club with Bruce, who was the provincial coach, also to stay on his radar that frequently was a good thing.
Yeah, I think that especially when you're as competitive as you are, I found the league that we played in, the first league, were really competitive. The first teams in the leagues were really tough. Even from South African or Western Cape standards where I grew up, and were playing at Stellenbosch University at that stage. I think the lack of depth was probably the biggest thing. Is there wasn't great second or third team players that could fill gaps when there was injuries or when you guys had to leave for international duty. But the league was really strong, and there was obviously a lot of South Africans in the league as well. Matt and I couldn't swear too much Afrikaans because there was some Afrikaans referee at some point, I remember.
Right.
I think his surname was Smith. But how did you balance studies, work, playing club rugby, and then I can't imagine you guys playing a lot of test rugby in one season. It's to that mind shift of moving up the levels from club rugby to international, then back to club. Was that quite tough, especially when you strive to play as much international rugby as you can?
Yeah. So the big part. Yeah. Okay. I think the big part for me was, this discipline that I was given in boarding school around time management. That really helped. And I always pursued my studies. Playing rugby is super exciting. Training is getting on the pitch with the guys, watching the tape afterwards, all that good stuff is exciting and it's engaging, but you have hours of sort of downtime. And that's where I would just apply myself to my studies, because I knew that in Canada there's no professional rugby track, so I knew I would have to make that switch, and academics was the only option to maintaining working my mind as I was working through the rugby system.
At what age did you go and play in Newport in Wales? When was the season that you played there?
I played in the 98-99 season leading into the World Cup.
Okay. Yeah, so your 99 was your first World Cup that you played. And one thing that I think a lot of people in South Africa doesn't know is when I told them I was in Canada, they was like, "Geez, you must have frozen your ass off." But we played in some extreme conditions in Toronto in the heat and humidity, and then you would think that it's cold, but then actually I remember we played our final in the first week in November and it was snowing. So you go from cold to really hot, and then it's really cold again. So I guess keeping guys motivated to come to training is also a tough thing. And one thing I find very frustrating, especially at club level, which for the most part was very amateur in my younger days here as well, is your, rock up on a Thursday training and there's 10 guys, training, but everyone wants to play on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Now I can imagine being as frustrated in a setup where rugby is so small that you guys have the same frustrations as well.
Somewhat. I mean, at the beginning of the season, everybody's engaged. They just want to get out on the pitch. So it doesn't matter how cold, how muddy, and how wet it is outside. Guys are keen to get out. In the middle of the season, if you remember, there's a few weeks of a break, and that gets us through the dust bowls, the 40-degree Celsius, 100% humidity type summers that we get. And then near the end of the season, it's all about the cup run and getting guys prepared. But yeah, certainly when you show up to training and there's only like 10 guys on the pitch, or even there could be a whole team there, the whole squad there, but not a lot of guys are engaged, or the key person is missing, as you alluded to, shortage of depth. That can be frustrating, but it's also a huge opportunity for the one or two young kids who are like, yeah, okay, we'll take a shot with this guy. And if he's been there for 10 training sessions in a row, but our number one sort of fly half or hooker hasn't been there for 5 sessions, then you know what? We will take that risk and sub those guys in. Yeah.
One thing that I really enjoyed was in our Balmy Beach team alone, there were a couple of caps, yourself, Jeff Tomlinson, afterwards Simon getting a cap for Canada, and that's really something that in, let's call it, first world rugby countries we've lost, is that exposure to play with really professional guys who've played at a much higher level, which is great to bring up young kids. And one thing that I could never fault any of the teams we played against or in the Balmy Beach was just the commitment and passion they have for rugby. And that was really, really great to see in Canada.
Yeah, it's a passion and a commitment for the community, like that rugby community. We are still that whole team. Like if you came down to the club on an alumni event, you would see 90% of the guys that some of them are still playing. Scotty Dunham, Hayden Gage.
Hayden still.
Yeah. And what I love about it is that community is so passionate about rugby, but also like our friendship. And I've taken upwards of, I want to say 10 Balmy Beach players down to the Bermuda World Rugby Classics. And played with them down there. I mean, we've played against South Africa.
And you beat them last year, 2 years ago.
Yeah, we did beat them, which was just epic. We've beaten Australia down there. Awesome. We've played against the British Lions, and certainly from my perspective, I'm seeing guys that I've played against through my international career, through club rugby and stuff. So it's great that those guys can come down and see these other players as well. So certainly we don't we know that as Canadian national rugby players that we hold a certain esteem, if you will, in the community. But relatively, we're pretty humble people, because rugby in Canada is a pretty humble sport.
Yeah. Well, I know a couple of my friends who went to that Bermuda tournament for a couple of years, and we won't talk about what happens off the field, but that's the one tournament they don't want to miss, and make sure they make the squad to go over there. But on a more serious note,
I've said, Colyn, that
hey,
I've said to people all the way up to current national team players, I've said, the Bermuda World Rugby Classic is the tournament you've played your whole career to go to. Like you earn the right to go there, and it's the camaraderie, the island itself is just amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's the big thing about rugby, and I remember somewhere in one of the conversations at the club, or someone I can't remember who at the Balmy Beach Club told me the difference between rugby and ice hockey is that you would want to hit the head of a guy on a rugby field, but when the final whistle blows, you shake your hand, you have a beer afterwards. Where in ice hockey, it's on a kind of, it never stops on the ice. It goes a bit further. And that for me really is, I mean, you could literally stand there waiting to punch a guy. The final whistle will blow and you would reach out and shake his hand.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, game over. I was still grab beer.
So 99 was your World Cup. I remember seeing highlights of the World Cup. 99 was your World Cup that you played, and I remember seeing a video. I think it was at my uncle's house of highlights or tries of the World Cup. I can't remember against who, but you scored a intercept try in that World Cup.
Yeah.
And again, you were quite young at that stage, probably in the prime of your career. You had quite a good strong squad. Where did you guys end up in '99 at the World Cup?
I think our final seed was I want to say 15th. We dropped our match against Fiji, which was well, I think we had the driver's seat in that game in the first half, and in the second half, a few wrong calls by us as from a strategy perspective, and a few lucky bounces of the ball that the Fijians seem to always get.
Canada has had some amazing players, world-class players, compared to the best from the All Blacks in South Africa. Al Sharon, Gareth Rees, Rod Snow, Christen Stewart, which for me growing up in Western Province in Cape Town, he was one of my idols as an outside centre. Did you ever play with him? Was he also in those squads that you played with while you were at test level?
No, he basically finished playing in '95.
Okay.
And that's when I started playing.
Okay.
Yeah.
2002, you played your last test against Scotland. I had a look at the squad, and it was a strong Scottish team. It was by no means a second-tier squad that went over to play you guys in Vancouver, which you guys also won 26-23.
Yep.
Did you ever feel at that stage, 28 years old, look, we can actually, from here, Canada can go from strength to strength, beating more first-tier teams? Or did you feel, look, we're still lacking either depth in squad, a new coach, or a new way to play and to be competitive?
I think, well, that Scottish test was a bit bittersweet for me. That was my last test. And I only got on the last sort of half hour. There was a number of political things happening with rugby in Canada, particularly the coaching squad, the board of directors, things like that, which is always going to happen. Rugby is a team sport made up of individuals, and those individuals are on the team, in the stands, and in the boardroom. And they're all trying to do the best thing that they possibly can. We had a really good run for 4 or 5 years. We tied Ireland. We had some good showings against some top nations. And then this Scottish match was one where we dropped the first test in Toronto, which I didn't play on in my hometown, so I was really pissed off. But then against Scotland, like, we had a really good team. We had a really good sense of team. We may not have had the best individuals on the team, but certainly what I would say is we had a really good team feeling, and that's the best feeling you can ask for when we went into that. So yeah, we went into that game thinking, yeah, we've played them last week. We dropped the score line a little bit, but we were a hell of a confident team.
Yeah. Well, it leads into my second following question, which is kind of the frustrating part looking at rugby that you mentioned. Did you feel that after that test, or that year of 2002, were you out of sync with the coaching staff? Because you were definitely not too old or too young to play. You played your 25th test. Was it a coaching thing that you just, as a player, didn't fit in? And we see it very often, even in Super Rugby and in our national team here in South Africa, that a guy performs, out of his boots at Super Rugby level. But let's say as a centre, he's just not the kind of centre that the national team needs or wants. Did you ever feel you didn't really fit into that coaching or style of play that the coaches wanted?
I mean, in short, yes. I think I lost favor with the coaching staff, but I don't think it was necessarily my style of play, what I was good at, or my strength and fitness levels. In Canada, we are a large country, and the powerhouse of rugby, if you will, is in Vancouver, in British Columbia. And at that stage in my life, the coach was saying, you need to commit and come out west and commit further to the sport and to the team. And the only way you can do that is by coming out west.
Yeah.
At this stage, I had just started my master's in business administration. And I was really weighing up whether or not I wanted to sacrifice that and move out west. And I think so. When I had those conversations with the coach, there was a lot of push and pull, and in the end, there were other players who were willing to make that sacrifice, and I decided to stay in Toronto.
I would say it's probably a lot more. There's a lot of other things on your mind compared to if you were in South Africa and you asked me to move from Cape Town to Johannesburg, purely because of the scale of what rugby can offer you here. So. And that's kind of I guess, something I wanted to chat to you about, which I often do with my professional friends who played rugby here. Rugby is very much an amateur sport still in Canada. What would you say is besides turning pro, and I know Toronto's got a team in the major league in the US, but what do you see the next steps for Rugby Canada to say, look, we can grow the sport in Canada and make us very competitive?
So going back to my earlier comment, I would say when I was 19 years old, I did move out west, and I dropped school, I dropped work, and I entered into what was called the Commonwealth Center for Sport Development. And that's where, I played my best rugby, met a lot of the guys, and, that's what it takes to play at a high level in Canada, is you have to commit to that degree. And I did that for 2 years, and then my rugby career took off. Sort of ending with captaining the Canadian team, playing professional, doing all that great stuff. At the end of my career, though, end at sort of 28, I was like, wow, I'm 28 years old. I'm looking around at my peers who have been in the workforce for 5 years, and I'm like, wow, I'm pretty far behind here, and there isn't a big future unless you wanted to keep playing amateur test rugby. So that was my sort of fold over. But I think where we can excel, and we are starting to do it again, is get these athletes, identify athletes, get them together, and make sure they're playing rugby as often as possible while training at the highest level that they can. That's a big ask, but certainly the team that I was out with in BC, we trained 6 days a week, test match on Saturday, recovery on Sunday, and it was the best rugby team that I've ever played on. And I think that's going to be the success, is if we can find these kids now and get them out into this centralized training area. The big hurdle is how we do on the national stage, on the international stage. There isn't a Christen Stewart, Al Sharon, Rod Snow that kids can look up to right now, because the team is changing quite frequently. Certainly, they've got some great players. DTH, I mean, that guy is he's phenomenal to watch, and you're always watching him even if he doesn't have the ball. But outside of that, there isn't a lot of consistency, and certainly our results are nothing to stand for.
Do you see a future for yourself as being involved with Rugby Canada and you know, not just giving back, but also being an ex-player? You definitely have a lot more experience to know what the players want, what they need. Do you think or see yourself in a role sometime like that, or is what you do now currently kind of the career you want to pursue?
I've never left the game. You know, I sit on the Balmy Beach Club alumni group. I sit on the Rugby Canada Foundation raising money. I sit on the Toronto Inner City Rugby Foundation as well, trying to get kids involved in this sport. And I'm always sort of talking to people involved with Ontario Rugby, with Rugby Canada. As a profession now, I'm an risk management commercial insurance broker. I run a business in Toronto, and at one point when I was at another company, ran the insurance program for Rugby Canada. And I did that knowing exactly what a player goes through when they travel either to a club game or internationally. I can add that sort of perspective into how they manage risk and what happens if you get injured and you're in Russia and nobody speaks the language. I'm always dabbling in the game here and there, and certainly deal with Rugby Canada quite a bit in managing the team that goes down to Bermuda.
Which is the fun part of the job. Just to go back to the sevens, the growth phase of rugby, which, I mean, Canada has done really well in the sevens circuit. They won the Vancouver tournament earlier this year. We hear often that people talk about sevens being kind of the level to grow the game globally. Do you see a lot of that being, let's get the younger guys into the sevens circuit to transfer them into the 15-man code?
So when I started, before I got my first test match in 15s, I had been about 24 months playing in sevens. And at that stage, it didn't look anything like it does now. Was it a great training ground for international experience, playing in front of big crowds, pressure on, seeing the different types of style of player throughout the world? It absolutely helped. I was at the Vancouver Sevens this year with my family and just had an amazing time. And what I know is that those players are highly specialized. And the big thing for us when I was playing rugby is how much time you have together as a team. And certainly at sevens, those guys travel all the time. They live together. And that helps. They know the moves before they even see the guy take off. So I think it's a really great platform to get kids interested in the game. I'm not sure today's sevens player necessarily transitions over really well to 15s. We see it. There's quite a few guys who've tried to make the step to Super Rugby and a couple of guys playing in Japan. But one thing that I can say is I remember the previous Olympics in Brazil, where a couple of Springboks tried to go back to play in the Olympics. And you could just clearly see that the 15-man code skill level, a simple thing like throwing a 10-meter pass on the run at speed, for a 50-man guy, it's they don't do it because it very rarely happens in the match. In the sevens, they shoot it out like a bullet. So the skill levels are definitely very different, but it is such a fun tournament to take the game around the world. And I do think it's a nice way to introduce the game to young kids, but I agree with you. There's definitely a big difference between the pace of the game and the skill levels of what those guys have. And the fitness levels.
I don't think they drink a beer after a game like we used to do.
Absolutely not. But I'll tell you, in Vancouver, they had over the course of 2 days, they had 30 to 40,000 people in that stadium watching some of the best athletes in the world. And if Canada was to host a test match against any nation that would come and play against Canada, they would struggle to get 15,000 people. The draw and the excitement and the platform and the structure of the weekend, it just makes for a great spectacle, if you will. And I think that is needed to keep drawing interest, particularly money interest, in the sport in Canada.
Carl, to kind of close off, if you can, with your professional rugby cap on, with your business cap on, you made a very, very adult decision at 28, which I think a lot of players, again, in South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, maybe play 5-6 years too long rather than starting to work and building a career. What would the 2 or 3 things, or one thing be that you would say, if you're a young kid now going into professional rugby, be aware of these 2 or 3 things and make sure you tick those boxes, to look after yourself post-game?
Yeah, so that's a big question. I think first of all, when you're faced with the decision as an amateur player in Canada that you have the opportunity to go on a track to make the national team at any age grade or code, versus staying your path and going into the trades or going and pursuing an academic career, professional career. I think early on you have to make that decision wholeheartedly. You have to say, yep, I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to commit for 2 years to do it. 2 years is not a long period of time, and you don't really get separated too much from your cohort, because you can't walk down 2 paths at the same time if you want to make that kind of commitment. But I think it's also reasonable that you have check-in points to make sure that you're continuing down that path, and that's the right path for you. Certainly that's what I did. I knew this was something I wanted to do. I had my family's support, my friends' support, and committed wholeheartedly to it through injuries, through financial difficulties, anything along those lines. I stuck to it, and I stuck to training because it doesn't cost to run. You can always get fitter. But I think every now and again, you have to look in the back of your head and say, okay, so what are my options down the line? I knew that I wanted a professional contract, and was lucky enough to get that at Newport, where there's a long tradition of Canadians and South Africans there. So that was something I did, and I checked the box, but I quickly realized that wasn't for me. There was a lack of structure that I was looking for. I couldn't enroll in school, things like that. So I knew that wasn't for me, but I still carried on with my rugby career, pursuing a slowly churning academic career in the background. But then once I realized that, my profession, I wanted to do a certain thing with my professional life, and rugby wasn't going to pay me to do that. What I did was I leveraged my Canadian national rugby team status into getting my academics paid for, and I really applaud the government of Canada to support that for all athletes who can do that. But at some point it becomes unmanageable, and then that's what I found, and made that decision. And what I did after Scotland, the Scotland test, I was like, yep, I'm done. I'm not enjoying it. I've got another priority in my life, and moved on. So you just have to have these checks and balances, but be fully committed at the same time.
Yeah. Where were you in 2019 watching the Rugby World Cup final?
Oh, where was I? I was in my home with a few people. I went to Japan though, and
did you go with Aaron and the guys? You were all over there for a bit.
Yeah. So we saw Canada, New Zealand. We saw Japan, Samoa, and then we saw Canada, South Africa. Man, it was awesome, just awesome.
Yeah, it was definitely. We during this lockdown, we get to see a lot of the replays and obviously a lot of documentaries. But it was definitely an amazing time for South Africa after such a couple of tough years in rugby, but just in general. So it's definitely something that you can watch over and over again.
So
very proud of the boys.
So Aaron and I were actually in Bermuda around the kitchen table watching the final. And I will tell you, and I'm not ashamed at all to say this, Aaron and I are watching the final, and then we hear Kolisi speak. And Aaron and I were had tears in our eyes, because you could tell that this was much more than a game.
Yeah. It
was one of the most passionate asks of a country that I've ever seen. How he talked about the lead up, and then the support, how he thanked the other fans, how he thanked the English fans, but then talked to his country. It was amazing, and you can tell that rugby in South Africa transcends just the sport.
Yeah, I must say it's. I'll let you know, but there's a documentary, kind of the road to the Rugby World Cup, called Chasing the Sun, which the guys are launching in August, and I do think that's kind of a lot of behind the scenes stuff and interviews with the players that will, I guess, answer a lot of questions that we've had, like what happened, how did it happen. We've seen snippets on the Coach Rassie Erasmus Twitter feed, but like you quite rightly said, it not only transformed South Africa in a big way, but it just exemplified again what sport can do.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very lucky to meet you guys, and those 7 months in Canada, Toronto was one of the best times of my life. And you meet friends for life that you know that you'll never forget. And I played after that in 2004 in New Zealand. The rugby was harder. Obviously the whole culture of rugby in New Zealand is very different. But I wouldn't trade the social and like friends you meet in Canada compared to New Zealand was much better, and it was a very different experience. So thank you very much, Carl, making time out of your day. Good luck with what's happening at this stage. I hope to maybe see you one day in Bermuda. Have a couple of beers and hopefully see you on the field sometime.
Absolutely, and thanks for reaching out to do this. It's always a pleasure to put on the Balmy Beach blazer, especially during these times of lockdown.
I'm going to send you my size. I would love to have one.
Absolutely, yeah, we're putting orders in all the time.
Awesome, Carl. Thank you very much, and say hello to everyone there.
I will do, Colin. Cheers.
Cheers, man.
Bye.